back to Integral in Action, and we've now got Ken and Stuart. Both have warned me that when the two of them are together, they get a little out of control. So I'm somewhat nervous of what my moderating is going to involve in the next few minutes. But there's been various questions that have come in, but the first one I thought I'd put to both of you is, where do you see Integral most alive in the world at the moment? Like, where are the places that it feels like it's rocking, like it's happening?
Well, I in the past 7, 8, 9 years, Integral has seemed to really just taken off. And it's like there were several years of sort of laying down a lot of the fundamental principles and doing a lot of the work and homework and all that. But then as more people were moving into integral levels, and they were looking around for ways to understand their condition, what that meant, and so on. And there weren't any. And so finally, when they would stumble on a book about integral, a good one, then all of a sudden it made sense to them. And they said, okay, I get it. Aha, this is it. And sometimes they go nuts, So like if they're a dentist, by the time they're halfway through the first book on integral, then they've already thought of a book on integral dentistry.
What is that? Sounds painful.
I know. It's like integral everything. But we do have, in the Journal of Integral Theory and Practice, the professional journal in the field, we have over 60 disciplines that have been completely recast in an aqual integral framework. And that means that just all the basic fundamental tenets of a particular discipline, whether it's art, music, medicine, nursing, education, politics, etc. 60 of those have been done in integral terms. And the results in every case is more comprehensive, more efficient, more effective, and just basically much more satisfactory. So it's like we're sort of seeing the beginning, I think, of it actually taking hold and having an impact and having an effect. So we had everything from architectural review, which is sort of the main journal for architecture, and on this online journal, it had an entire year devoted with a major article each month in a series they called the Big Rethink, an entire redoing the entire principles of architecture based on integral principles. We had Ukraine ask us to help rebuild Ukraine ground up based on integral principles. We had the British government wanted to know how its citizens would handle adaptation to climate change as opposed to mitigation, just getting rid of it. And so they went out and they used a all-quadrant, all-level questionnaire. So they had questions from all 4 quadrants through several 4 or 5 levels, which gave a very, very in-depth indication of where British citizens were in all of these areas. And so it was a much richer and thicker and fuller type of interview process than other ones were. We find these types of things just seem to continue to sort of show up almost everywhere. And it's great. I mean, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
it's looking really good. We have dozens of organizations like Integral Nursing, which is the largest now nursing branch in America, and it uses the Aqua framework to train nurses on how to do that. There are dozens of medical facilities that now teach integral medicine, and they've actually had that several teams to the Obama White House several times.
Amazing.
Trying to incorporate integral medicine into Obamacare.
Amazing. I'm going to put the same question as Stuart. I'm not expecting quite such a scholarly answer, but let's
copy and paste. Yeah, I would certainly agree with all of that, but also, I mean, in my own life, I mean, it's everything from, it's fun to think back 15 years ago when we first started hanging out, and the incipient immersion of the first Integral Institute and, you know, all of the branches and richness of that has, in 15 years, become what you just described in the very real sense in all of those domains all over the world. So yes, totally all of that. I just want to say it's been magic and exhilarating to feel that happen in my lifetime. It's like 100-fold better than the Berlin Wall coming down. It feels like these developmental Berlin walls have been dropping in all of those locations that he just described. I would say that, interestingly, I also feel it very much in my own life, day to day, in my family, in my relationship with my wife, in the way that our raising a family is affected and influenced by the fact that we've absorbed and metabolized this work, these models, your books, and the community, and the way that that invisibly functions as a positive influence. It's like being within this community, you kind of get to live in the embassy of Integral. And so that's one place I definitely feel it. The other two that I think are special and prominent for me are in my Zen practice. It was so fun to hear you guys speaking about integral Zen. I feel that all of the Zen teachers I'm interested in and working with and feel very much excited by are combining, synthesizing, coupling, integrating in some fashion integral with Zen. And I think what's emerging is just totally mind-blowing and has profoundly refreshed my enthusiasm and sense of potential for that as a spiritual practice. And then with everything to do with Hollywood, I work in show business, so whether it's music, television, film, even theater, what I find in going to LA in the last 15 years is that there's an enormous population of people, there's a great demographic of folks in every strata, from the highest positions of power to all the folks working in production and everything in between. There's a real thriving population of folk who know this work and understand it well and are interested in discovering the way to introduce it, not in a didactic fashion, but as a natively functioning intelligence within the entertainment we create. That's very different. It's still in the zone where you were describing earlier as well, which is it's frustrating to be in a room, for instance, during a pitch, and feel everyone in the room concordant on those principles. It's not rare to encounter integrally intelligent or informed, even explicitly programming folks or development folks. But when they leave the room and they have to go back and pitch it to the board of directors, that's where what you were describing comes into play. Right. That's where the tension between the inertia that's in place for old stages, levels, or even just modalities of making entertainment bump up against this emergent sprout. That's a little more painful, and I thought that was going to change earlier. I think a lot of us got the enthusiastic, this event in our head initially, and then I felt like this is going to happen in 5 years. In 5 years, or it's going to be 10. Well, it's been 15. It's been a little slower than we thought maybe, but still totally happening in my lifetime, which is a great surprise. So I'd say family life, Zen, and showbiz.
Nice, nice. The other questions that have come in, one question in particular I think is good for people which are new to integral. Like, what's a good entry point? I mean, you know, some people just come in and it's just like, so I can talk from personal experience, it's like totally mind-blowing. It's like devouring your books like a bulimia on speed. It's just like, can't get enough. And others, it's like initially it can feel a little like, oh my God, there's all these books, these kind of complex words. Like, what's an easy entry point for people? And I'd be curious from both of you to kind of hear that.
Well, the, there are a lot of ways to convey ideas and convey theories or philosophies or notions or whatnot. The thing about integral that can make it just a little bit difficult is the simple fact that it is trying to cover, in a sense, all of knowledge. It is trying to make room for all of that. And so that can be daunting. That people can look at it and go, okay, wait a minute, that's a... So for many years, I had a reputation of just a head tripper. That it just an academic, lost in the clouds, and that's not really true. But I can see how people would get that impression. On the other hand, these areas are there. I mean, so it's not really a matter of we're trying to make something complex and glom onto it. It's more, okay, we can recognize the real world, and we can recognize all of these different areas in it, or we can ignore them. And those are our only two choices. And if we ignore them, they don't go away. If we ignore them, they are still whacking into us on a daily basis and causing all of these changes and impacts and effects that they have on us. And so we can either learn that, get with it, and use it to our advantage, make it something that we can use and that will be extremely helpful to our lives. Or we can ignore it and just keep getting knocked over by it with no idea of where it's coming from or what it means or anything like that. So we really don't have an intelligent choice except to go ahead and try and learn a little bit about an integral overview and all of the areas that it affects and ways we can use it to then apply to our lives, our jobs, our work, our play, our everything.
It's almost like what you're saying is if we want our life to be easier and to work better,
right,
and to make more sense, then we kind of have somewhat of a responsibility to engage with it.
Right.
And I guess I sometimes think it's that thing where we want our lives to be different, but we don't want to have to change.
Right.
It's like we want to be able to resist the complexity or the kind of the engagement and
right,
just stay the kind of complainer, frustrated victim.
Right.
But there's, what you're saying is, in a sense, if we want life to make more sense and to flow, there's a certain engagement
right,
with that. Stuart, what are your thoughts of people?
It's an interesting question. I think for me, the easiest entry point, or at least the one that makes the most sense, is the puzzle or the riddle or the problem that you're confronting, which is sustained, and the tools and assets you are approaching it with are no longer sufficient. When you hit that chasm, that is a real invitation to start experimenting with this, not only as a cognitive set of a mobile of ornaments around your head, but like what happens when you implement them into your own life. Just conduct that experiment, and if you try an integral approach to living your life and functioning in society, and it works better than what was going on before, I think that's a great in point wherever you are. It could be dentistry, it might be art, it might be wrestling, whatever. It totally won't matter.
Integral wrestling. Just how does that work?
See, it's another call to action. So I think that's kind of the no-brainer part of it, which is if what you were doing didn't work and you felt this dissonance as a call and you followed it through with an integral approach, imperative, and compass, and you did better on the other side. In my experience, and it's just me and all the people that I know that have had some time with this and life experience, once you get to that form of success, which is not perfection, it's not complete, it's just such a better set of problems that you can never go back. It's nuts to go back to the flat, one-dimensional, monological thing you were describing before, which is like, I've got this one set of toolboxes, and everything that falls within the focus of this frame, once you get outside and everything's unpacked and multi-dimensional and rich and horizontal and vertical as a felt experience, not an idea, that's totally addictive and undeniable, and it works better.
Yeah, it's interesting. What I noticed in what you're saying is it actually, although the entry point might be in the mind, what actually happens is it goes beyond the mind, and that's the point of transformation, I guess, and the point where it's like the heart becomes engaged.
Yeah,
it's like that's where people get hooked, I guess.
We tend to say that this whole framework is psychoactive. And that means that every part of it, quadrants, levels, lines, states, types, shadow, self, and so on, that as you start to learn about those actually become psychoactive in the sense that they move through your body looking for those areas that haven't yet been activated or aren't really yet in gear, that you don't know are there and could be used. And they just kind of light them up. They kind of get them started. They get them activated. And once that happens, then you have energetic feelings and emotions and so on, not just thoughts, but feelings and emotions and energies that get lit up, and it start to have an actual impact. And you can feel it. It's a buzz. It's an on. It's an extraordinary sensation, and it's not the way some critics think, that it's just another academic stuff you have to learn, and why, even if it were a little bit, why they would be so afraid of a little academic learning is
maybe a little bit too much emphasis on that in the school system. Maybe it kind of puts people off. But,
yeah, I understand.
You're right. Sorry, I finished.
No, that's it.
So we've got Stuart probably another 5 minutes or so, and he has to leave. I'm going to give you guys a chance. Any questions that you want to put to either Ken or Stuart, or indeed put to both of them? Great.
Hi, so I'm new to Integral, but my question is around the arts and what role, and this can be for both of you or whoever would like to answer, but kind of what role do you see the arts playing or have played in, Integral and sort of this new expansion in fields of consciousness?
Are you saying heart?
Art.
Art.
Yeah.
Art. Yeah.
If you look at the traditional breakdown into something like the good, the true, and the beautiful, or art, morals, and science, these are three very different dimensions, but all of them are important. And so, particularly in integral meta theory, art is very important because it's the whole aesthetic dimension of a human being. And that aesthetic dimension is the dimension of immediate prehension and feeling and form recognition. And it does something that morals and science won't do. And so part of the reason that, for example, even though I'm supposed to write sort of academic books, usually someplace, sometimes towards the end of a chapter or even the end of a book, I'll sort of bust into more poetic writing. And that's important to me because that expresses items that can't be expressed any other way. And so that's very, very important. And another thing about art is that one of the great things about a really, really good artist is that they can portray a particular state of consciousness that if they're really good and you then view the artwork it can suck you in to the same state. And so that gives you a transformation that is like a miniature meditative practice. It just, I mean, I remember seeing Van Gogh, and I know it's a cliche, but it really took my breath away. I mean, I really just, and when it takes your breath away, why?
It takes your breath away, it takes your mic with it.
Why is his in once and mine, this is the 12th time?
My colleague Kim mentioned it was the size of your ears, Kim, but I
Oh, it's your twisted ear.
Is that what it is?
Don't give me. But I was Andrew Wyeth. They discovered, it was supposedly America's, painter. They discovered 50 Andrew Wyeth paintings. And it was largely of that woman, Inga, the sort of hidden muse that nobody knew about for a long time. And he had painted something like 50 paintings of her. And every now and then, some of them really were breathtaking. And they were doing a museum gallery display of these paintings. And for some reason asked me to write the art essay that would go with them. And one of the things that I ended up saying towards the end about one of the real functions of art, particularly if you go back to look at Schopenhauer and what some of the people said about it then, is that when art takes your breath away, it takes yourself away. And you're ushered into a non-dual subject-object unity. And that opens you up into that deeper dimension of reality. And then it could be almost anything, bugs or Buddhas or rocks or crosses or whatever. In the sheer talent of the depiction, the really, really great ones take your breath away. I mean, they just totally take your breath away. And when that happens, your separate self disappears and you're ushered into that higher dimension. And that's one of the great things that art does. That's something that science doesn't easily do. It's something that morals doesn't easily do. But it's something that art can do. And so there have been great idealists like Croce in Italy who identified spirit with the aesthetic dimension. Now, I don't think that totally works, but you can see that he was trying to draw towards that impact of just seeing an immediate form that is overwhelming, and that has a spiritual dimension to it. And so I think that aestheticism is extremely important. And Alex Gray and I ended up doing 3 forewords to 3 of his books because I thought aesthetics was so important.
We'll put the question maybe to Stuart for a moment as well. And I don't know if you want to touch on the creation of art in it as well.
Definitely. It's a really cool question, and one that I think and live every single day of my life. And as a practitioner of art and a creator, I feel myself to be part of this lineage that goes back to the very inception of humanity. And one of the things I think is interesting about art is that the little we know of how something came from nothing, which Ken has talked about over and over again in his books, the mystery of that, how this dirt became so frisky. Something from nothing. That puzzle is also what we enact every time we create art. And so I see art and being an artist as this study and a loyalty to something from nothing. And Integral in particular has been the most effective way to amplify and deepen my role in inhabiting something from nothing. And the way that I think art specifically applies as an asset to this problems that face us in all these different domains and the challenges and opportunities ahead is that just what Ken was saying, when you create an artwork that resonates at a certain frequency, that becomes a tuning fork in the human being, in the culture. That artifact, that artist resonating in the world does really interesting, unpredictable, unusual things. I can testify to this in my life. Music saved my life. I would be dead if I hadn't had the songs that I had access to, and it was because of what they were resonating. And so culturally, some of the things that are intractable become open to possibilities in these tiny windows where the right artistic resonation occurs, whether it's a painting or a TV show or a song or whatever it is. And so I completely agree. And I'm projecting and biased, of course, because I'm an artist, but I feel art is uniquely equipped to solve many of the most difficult hurdles that we're trying to get over in the next 100 years or so. And I also personally feel so excited to be an artist because it was there before civilization. It was there before language. It was there before religion. All of the developmental levels that we've been talking about today were preceded by this rudimentary form of people whacking shit and carving things and shapes on caves and patterns that were, I mean, the relationship between humans and pattern is probably one of the earliest forms of that artistic creative impulse. And I see it manifest in its most sophisticated and profound way in Ken's work. And that's a common one thread running through all of that. So I really love that you asked that question, and I'm excited to know how it would come on board for you and how it might change your life as an artist.
Thank you. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Stuart, I know you have to leave us.
Yeah, I gotta go.
Buddy, thank you so much. It's
Thanks
been
so
such
much,
a treat
guys.
to have you here.
I'm just going to go back to your bedroom. Is that cool? I'm not going to leave. I'm going to go to a different part of the house and move in.
I guess it depends what you're going to do in the bedroom.
Just like the old days. All right. I'll go home. Fine.
I love you.
See you soon.
Okay.
So, back to the more serious questions.
Yeah.
So there's a question, Ben Say, who is part of the Integral European team, has been feeding me questions on here, and he's put it a couple of times, said, you need to ask this question. So I guess there's some enthusiasm, which is, where you have your attention right now in your work, like what's the edge of your own inquiry right now?
The edge of my...
Of your own inquiry. So what are you working on right now?
Well, what has... because Integral covers so many areas, I hate to sometimes get bogged down in just one area, science, art, morals, and I like to kind of keep my writing changing from one to the other. But for the past couple of years, and this is not bad, it's just something that I've noticed. I've been writing a lot on spirituality, and in part in the growing conviction that they're given the different types of spirituality, pre-rational, magic or mythic, rational deism, trans-rational, awakening, enlightenment, and so on, that if humanity is going to have a chance at survival, it needs to combine the best of all of its different disciplines, the best of science, best of technology, best of economics, but most of the thought leaders consistently leave out spirituality. They leave it out because there are 2 or 3 different types, and some of those are indeed childish and archaic and way out of date, and are good, and I don't mean this in a bad sense, in a conveyor belt. They're good for kids at age 3, 4, 5. But to have a president of the United States believing in magic voodoo or in mythic fundamentalism is a disaster.
You mean Donald Trump? Sorry.
So we need the really, really great forms of spirituality. And so in order to get that to happen, there are certain characteristics in spirituality that have never been spelled out historically. And these in particularly include structures of consciousness and states of consciousness, what we call growing up and waking up. And these are two very different types of spiritual engagement. So growing up is spiritual intelligence, how you think about spirit, how you interpret it, and so on. That's very important. But also important, of course, is actually waking up and having a direct experience of spirit itself. Now, both of those are important because the way that waking up experience will be experienced is that it will be interpreted by the stages of growing up. So archaic, magic, mythic, rational, pluralistic, integral, super integral. You want your enlightenment to be interpreted by at least integral or super integral. And so putting these two together, again, which has never happened before in history, is absolutely crucial. And we need people to both develop their growing up capacities to enlightenment, their waking up capacities to enlightenment, and their growing up capacities to integral. Both of those are needed. You can have enlightenment at red power. You can have it at amber fundamentalism. We all know mystics that have very deep realization, but they're hooked into their own fundamentalist outlook. Many of them are homophobic. Many of them are xenophobic. Many of them are warlike because they haven't succeeded well in growing up. They've just done waking up. And vice versa. You can have people that do very well in growing up, but don't have a clue about waking up. And so neither one of those helps today's world. And yet we have people out there pushing both of them. And you can sympathize with them. The people pushing mindfulness and meditation and Zen and waking up, that's very important. But you can do that and be at a fundamentalist amber stage of growing up. That doesn't help.
Yeah.
That hurts.
You can be a great meditator and still be an arsehole in your life.
Absolutely.
Right.
And so getting both of these together is extremely important. And so I've just sort of gotten into 3 or 4 books that deal specifically with those items.
You mean we've got 3 or 4 books to look forward to?
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so if we can get those together and get a conveyor belt up and running so that Orthodox religions have some understanding of the different dogma at each level, then that's going to be crucial to keeping a spiritual engagement alive in the coming years. Without it, it's just going to remain the laughingstock of the modern and postmodern world. And the new atheists, Hitchens, Dawkins, Hawkins, etc., they're going to continue to just trash all religion. Where all they're attacking really is the mythic literal form. I mean, how hard is it to attack Moses parting the Red Sea or Elijah going to heaven in a chariot? That's all they do. They don't attack meditative stages. And Sam Harris, who's in it, he actually practices Buddhist meditation, so he never attacks that. He attacks the mythic, literal fundamentalists. Understood. That was fine 2,000 years ago. It's not good now. In today's world, it would be something that a 7-year-old would go through in the conveyor belt as he or she moved on to higher stages. But to just have that be the one dogmatic belief and have everybody believe it, including 50-year-old individuals still believing Moses parted the Red Sea and all of that stuff, is a tragic waste of spiritual potential. And so we really do need to get these growing up and waking up, along with showing up and cleaning up and so on. But particularly growing up and waking up, we need to get together and get those out there. And so I spent a fair amount of time on that, and now the 4th book after those is back to the 2nd book following sex, ecology, spirituality. Mm-hmm. So it'll be less seeped in spirituality and more in philosophical, psychological terms.
And do we have any dates of when any of these books are going to come out?
A book called Integral Meditation will be out in 3 months.
Wow. Wow.
And then a very important book, a 900-page book called The Religion of Tomorrow.
Makes sex, ecology, spirituality like a kind of starter book.
Yeah. Well, it'll be out after that.
Uh-huh.
And then the follow-up to SES will be out after that.
Very exciting. Very, very exciting.
Yeah.
We've got about 15 minutes. I've got one question online that I want to finish with, but I also want to give you guys a chance. Yeah.
So this growing up and waking up that you're integrating, I just want to mention that you also separated them. This separating growing up and waking up is probably, well, I'll take the probably out. It's the most important idea since the theory of evolution, this Wilber-Combs lattice, which is really, there's 2 processes going on, waking up and growing up, which leads us to the cleaning up question.
Yeah.
You so clearly articulate what shadows are.
Yeah.
And it just is the clearest articulation I've ever heard.
Thank you.
So I'm wondering if you could share with the audience what shadows are and why shadow work is crucial.
The nature of evolution, going all the way back to the Big Bang, is transcend and include, transcend and include, transcend and include. And what that means is that you have an atom, then the next stage of development transcends the atom, that's the molecule. Transcends means it goes beyond. It's more complex than the atom, it includes a lot of atoms, but it is a transcendence of the atom. It goes beyond it. But it also includes it. It actually enwraps it and enfolds it. In the same way, when molecules move into cells, the cells transcend molecules. They bring them together, act on them, but they're transcending them. They're going beyond them. They have something greater in them than the molecules have in themselves. But they also include them. They actually enwrap them, enfold them, and bring them with them. Now, this goes on all the way up into humans. And humans stages of growth also transcend and include, transcend and include, transcend and include. Now, something can go wrong with either one. So if transcend is too overdone, too aggressive, too intense, then you actually repress. You move beyond and push away the lower. You don't take care of it. You don't include it. You don't enwrap it. And so that pushing away sets up one type of shadow, because it's pushing away some component of the psyche. And if something goes wrong in the inclusion and there is not an accurate and smooth inclusion, then it gets split off, and you can get addictions to that. It's unconscious. You haven't let go of it, and so you remain addicted to it. You remain stuck to it. So that's another type of shadow. So you have, simply because of the nature of evolution, you have these two types of shadows, which is either going too far and splitting off, or not going far enough and therefore remaining stuck. And those are addictions and allergies. And so that means that as your interior growth is occurring, certain components are getting either split off or addicted, stuck to. Allergies are developing or addictions are developing. And that does mean the shadow's not fitting in to the ongoing march of consciousness. It's getting split off as a subpersonality. And that subpersonality maintains the needs and the wants and the actual age of when it was split off or repressed or pushed out as a subpersonality. And when that happens, it takes a bit of consciousness with it as it moves out of the ongoing growth stream. And so it remains in the basement with all of these desires and needs that it had when it was split off. If it was split off at 5, it remains 5 years old. If it's split off at 7, it remains 7 years old. And it has 7-year-old desires. This can happen literally all the way up. It can happen in the second tier and into third tier. And so what's so important is that when those subpersonalities are split off and they take their bit of consciousness with them, then the amount of consciousness you have, active and effective, becomes less and less and less. And so if you start off with 100 pesos of consciousness, and at each major fulcrum, you lose 5 in one, and then you lose 10, so you've lost 15, then you lose maybe another 10, you've lost 25, now you only have 75 pesos left, and then you move on up and you lose another 10, now you've only got 65 left. And so as you're starting to hit second tier and you've only got 65 pesos left, and you've got 35 that are subconscious, maybe it takes 80 pesos of force to get into second tier. You don't have it. So your growth comes to an arrested development, and it just stalls. And if you don't get those subpersonalities back into consciousness and integrated into consciousness so they can move forward, then you're going to be not just stuck at a lower level, but you're going to be kept out of the higher levels of development. And the great traditions don't cover those very well. So that's another item that you need to bring into a meditative practice. They cover states fairly well. They get the states of development down fairly well. They don't get the structures, and they don't get shadow. And so structures and shadow are two things that have to be introduced into a meditation system to get the whole really functioning fully, and to get you growing into the higher potentials, higher capacities, higher spiritual possibilities that you have. And so that's a general look at shadow. It's very, very important issue.
And if I understand you correctly, that consciousness that you're measuring in pesos, you call authenticity.
Yeah, another term. Sure.
The more that's getting spun off, the less pesos you have, because you've got all these disowned selves and
Yes.
these addicted selves.
Yes.
Then the less authentic one is.
Yeah, absolutely. And because the less of consciousness as presence you have. And so you really start to assume sort of shaky, false self systems that don't ring true, aren't authentic, don't have much integrity. Not a good way to go through life.
Yeah. And thank you.
Yes.
This clarity that you bring to that is become a foundational practice in Integral Zen.
Great.
We call it illuminating Zen.
Wonderful.
Nice.
Wonderful.
Nice.
All right.
So we've got about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
But the final question, someone's reminded us online that we had in the kind of description, and I forgot to ask it, which I'd like to put in two parts, which is, what are the practices that have most supported you in your life and your development? And it may be the same answer, it might be a different answer. Of somebody that's relatively new to Integral, what would be the practices that you would be encouraging them to start with?
My practices have been both constant and eclectic. Some of the most constant practices have, of all the traditions, as you look around the world, there are many, many, many of them are absolutely wonderful. I have found that there's nothing as complete and complex as the overall Buddhist system. And so just as a sort of constant practice, I tended to stay with that. But I also practice Vedanta and Tai Chi and Christian contemplative development, certain Sufi practices, certain Kabbalah, and so on. Just simply trying to get a taste and understanding of all of these. And I still tend to do that kind of mixture, along with some just very core practices that I brought together from Buddhism and Vedanta and Christian contemplative and so on. And that's just developed into a core practice that I stay with fairly well. In terms of people getting into Integral, again, even though it's charged with being too heady and all of that, these are ideas that are representing realities that are there. These realities are coming now to a position in historical unfolding, where these realities are becoming more and more important and becoming more and more the determinants of how our history goes. We can't afford not to study them. And if that means, yes, you have to think a little bit, okay, shoot me. You're going to have to think a little bit. We got through the last 30 years of not having to think.
Right.
It was come from the heart, all feeling, don't think, head tripping. By the way, when you get to turquoise, teal and turquoise, it's the first time that head and heart are both equally valued. So if you're still just playing one versus the other, count yourself first tier. So
nice.
Get into second tier, come from the heart, and study. Both are important, and really important, because that's the direction that human survival is going. And we need people that are rounded out in this way to be able to make the smart, solid decisions that are going to determine how we end up. And so the only overall map that's doing well at that right now is integral. So study that, and then also practice it, which brings up heart material quite effectively, more effectively than green does. And so stick with that and move forward.
Beautiful, beautiful. Ken, it has been such a treat. Thank you so much. Really do appreciate it.
Great.
And also thank you very much to you guys for being here and bringing your questions. Thank you to Stuart, who had to leave us, but for his beautiful performance as well. I'd also like to thank Mike and Colin, Ken's assistants. They've been massively supportive the last few days, so thank you for that. Thank you to my team, Nick and Tim. Also Ian, who's watching at home, who broke his collarbones before the trip, who was going to be here, so love to him. And also thank you to Bensei, Dennis and Aniko, the Integral European Conference team, who are our partners in this project. There'll be a video following explaining more about the 6-month online conference we're going to be doing with them. But for now, Ken, thank you so much. Thank you guys so much. And thank you guys at home for watching. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to get to all of the questions, but hopefully at some point in the future we'll have another chance, maybe something like this. But thank you for watching for now. Bye-bye.